Morning, everyone.
Morning.
It's great to see all of you. We had a very active discussion today within the caucus, focusing on the events that are transpiring, of course, all across the world, with an emphasis on, Russia's war of aggression against Ukraine and the Ukrainian people. And we, of course, recognize that the conflict right now is not simply one between Ukraine and Russia. It's a conflict between democracy and autocracy. It's a conflict between freedom and tyranny. It's a conflict between truth and propaganda. And it's a conflict that the West, Western values, and democracy must win. And we're going to continue to do everything possible to support the Ukrainian people. And we should be taking additional steps in that regard, hopefully in the near and or immediate future. We're excited about being able to convene in the city of Philadelphia, the birthplace of our democracy, at some point tomorrow afternoon for our issues conference. It'll be the first time we've been able to gather for an issues conference in person in 3 years. Excited for everyone's presence there. We will be hearing from President Joe Biden on Friday to conclude the conference, laying out additional steps as it relates to his vision for building a better America and building upon his remarks to the nation in terms of his State of the Union address. We'll have at least 6 cabinet level officials present, former cabinet level officials like Attorney General Eric Holder, present labor leaders like AFL-CIO President Liz Schuler, present practitioners, and many, many others to engage in the many issues and challenges that are on the agenda for us to tackle as we try to do our best for the American people during these incredibly perilous times. And we appreciate the fact that many members of the Fourth Estate will be there to participate and cover the issues conference as well. Let me now yield to our distinguished Vice Chair, Pete Aguilar.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. This week, we also talk about honoring the 1-year anniversary of the American Rescue Plan. 1 year ago, only 46% of our schools were open. 11 million people were unemployed, 4 million of them for 6 months or longer. There was no plan or infrastructure to deliver the vaccine through the country, despite the previous administrations having months to put that plan together. But that changed with the American Rescue Plan. 99% of schools are now reopened, 7.4 million jobs created, 200 million vaccines in arms. The positive impact of this legislation continues to be felt in our communities when we go back home, and building upon that success will be helpful with the omnibus spending bill. Community funding projects, as we heard from Chair Rosa DeLauro, will be included, and this ensures that federal resources are going toward our communities across the country. Members will have an opportunity to stand again, just like we did with the American Rescue Plan, arm in arm with our local government leaders, nonprofits, and other groups to show that we deliver tangible results and meaningful impacts at the neighborhood level. We're looking forward to voting this week and hope that our friends on the other side of the aisle who also have projects included in this legislation will join us to avoid a devastating government shutdown. We're also looking forward, as the chairman mentioned, to our time in the City of Brotherly Love for our retreat and to see so many of our colleagues in person. I think members will come away both inspired as well as ready and eager to advocate on behalf of the American people and our agenda. With that, the chairman will take your tough questions.
Scott.
Mr. Jeffries, thank you. You already know what's coming in terms of President Biden's announcement of the ban on Russian oil. Republicans are already attacking Democrats and the president for the higher gas prices that are sure to come as a result this announcement. How do you guys respond to some of those Republican attacks?
Well, certainly my hope that my Republican colleagues won't continue to play politics with an existential crisis for Ukraine, for Europe, for the West, and for democracy, because that is what is at stake right now. And we have to apply maximum pressure on Vladimir Putin and Russia until it ceases and desists with respect to its aggression and the slaughtering of innocent individuals in Ukraine. There may be some sacrifice that is required across the world. Certainly, we are seeing incredible sacrifice by the Ukrainian people, and the Poles and others who are right in that very tough neighborhood stepping up to help the Ukrainian people, refugees, to create humanitarian lines of entry and exit to support the effort to defend Ukraine. And we'll see what the impact may be ultimately here at home. But I think the American people, clearly the American people, regardless of partisan differences on other issues, have expressed the position that we're going to stand strongly behind the Ukrainian people, freedom and democracy.
In California, that's paying over $7 a gallon for gas. I had a friend post on Facebook just yesterday. They paid $100 to fill up their
Yeah, we're going to do everything possible, as the president laid out at his State of the Union address, to lower costs for the American people. And there was legislation that was brought to the floor of the House and passed that not a single Republican voted for, that would have lowered childcare costs, healthcare costs, education costs, housing costs, and energy costs. And we're going to continue to work on that agenda that President Biden laid out to deal with inflation, deal with gas prices, and lower costs for everyday Americans. Go to this side. Thanks.
Given that the president is going to make this announcement on an oil ban, does the House still need to move forward with its own legislation that would ban perhaps oil and gas, as well as cut off normal trade relations?
Well, that's a question that's still under discussion, and until final language has been agreed upon. And we expect that that language, hopefully, will secure bipartisan support, both in the House and the Senate. You know, I'll refrain from commenting on whether legislative action is necessary. Second row, thanks.
Looks like the White House is going to announce its own ban in about 20 minutes or so on Russian oil imports. Do you think it's pressure from the House that made this happen?
I think the administration and President Biden have led the way for months in bringing together the West, bringing together NATO, bringing together our European allies, along with Australia and Canada and Japan and many others. We saw that tremendous vote in the UN that was overwhelming in its support for the American people. I commend the United States ambassador to the UN for her leadership in that regard. But I commend President Biden for what he's done. I don't think that anything has created any pressure. He's been very clear-eyed and transparent with the American people all along the way, including prior to this conflict escalating, by releasing, intelligence information to the American people and to the world, telling everyone exactly what was going to happen. And so I'm very confident in President Biden's continued leadership, and I don't think anyone has pressured him into doing anything. I'll go back to this side. Thanks.
Thank you. Just a broader question about what you want to hear in Philadelphia from the president on Friday. The House Democrats have done everything the White House has asked of them in terms of passing legislation, but the midterm picture broadly still doesn't look good. What do you want to hear from him in terms of a midterm message, midterm strategy, economic message? What can vulnerable Democrats look for on Friday?
Well, thank you for your question. I'm going to yield to Pete to answer that particular question, but I'll briefly just say that as you've outlined, we've been strongly supportive of President Biden and his agenda. And he's had a tremendous record of accomplishment under incredibly difficult circumstances. As Vice Chair Aguilar laid out, when President Biden first took office, there were only 2 million Americans who were fully vaccinated. Now there are more than 200 million Americans fully vaccinated. It's one of the reasons why we've been able to get through the Omicron variant, and COVID right now is in retreat. We reduced child poverty in America during the last 6 months of 2021 by almost half of the rate that had existed during the prior administration as a result of the child tax credit, which we are continuing to fight for as we move forward. 7.4 million jobs were created during President Biden's first 13 months. That's a record in American presidential history when comparing a similar time frame. Fastest rate of economic growth in 40 years, unemployment down to pre-pandemic lows of 3.8, 3.9%. That's tremendous economic progress. And it started with the passage of the American Rescue Plan, which not a single Republican voted for. Now, at the same time, we understand that this has been a tough moment for the American people over the last several years. When you just talk about all of the uncertainty and the anxiety, the chaos of the prior presidency, a global, once in a century, deadly pandemic that has killed more than 900,000 Americans here at home, the resulting shock to the economy, first as it relates to having to shut down the economy, and then the supply chain issues, the supply and demand issues that are off kilter that have now resulted in the inflation dynamics that we're seeing that's hurting the American people, an insurrection, the fact that the peaceful transfer of power was interrupted almost for the first time in American history, a racial justice crisis that emerged in the aftermath of the tragic assassination of George Floyd. This has been a very difficult time for the American people. No more empathetic leader to help guide us through this difficult time than President Joe Biden. I expect that he'll lean in to that empathy and continue to articulate a vision for building a better America.
Just to follow up, so how do you explain his low approval ratings? Because no one would have a better one in this climate, or is there something he's doing better to highlight those gains that you just?
Well, polls go up, polls go down, and I think several of us noted with some interest that in the immediate aftermath of his State of the Union address, we've seen his polls begin to go back up, and I expect that's a trajectory that we'll continue to see.
Well, I think our colleagues are more concerned with outcomes than they are poll numbers. We want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to lower costs for Americans back in our districts. That's what Build Back Better did. The American Rescue Plan that we're celebrating this year did exactly that by creating that stability back in our communities, increased access to testing, helping our school districts so we can reopen faster. Those are the types of measurable things that we would expect the president to acknowledge, as well as I think we hope his continued commitment to partner with House Democrats on what's ahead. Specifically lowering costs, responding to Ukraine, but tying that back to our districts, to our communities. That's where members will run. That's what members will run on, is our success back home. And so those are the messages, those are the pieces that we're going to look to the president to lead on. And we're incredibly happy with the progress of the American Rescue Plan, the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, leading into this year and our response and getting this omnibus done. All of these pieces are incredibly helpful back home.
Obviously, I think everyone can agree that sanctions do work over time, especially this piece with sanctioning energy. We saw what it did to Iran. But is this the last card that the administration can play before thinking about something like closing the airspace? Obviously, Ukrainians would like to see that happen today. What are your thoughts on closing the airspace and this being the last card that you have?
Well, I support the president's position, as well as NATO's position and the European Union's position, that engaging in direct conflict right now with Russian forces, including the Russian Air Force, is not a step that we are prepared to take, because that could lead to a spiraling down and degrading of the situation that brings us into direct military conflict, which could be catastrophic for the world. So I do support the president's position there, but also believe that in addition to continuing to cripple the Russian economy, which is being done in an extraordinary way as a result of President Biden's leadership in partnership with Great Britain, France, and others throughout the world, that we have to make sure that the courageous Ukrainian people have the ability to defend themselves. They clearly have the will. They clearly have the heart and the soul to defend themselves. We're seeing an extraordinary display of bravery, men, women, and children alike. But we have to make sure, against one of the world's most powerful militaries, Russia, that they have the continuing ability to defend themselves. So I think, that is going to mean additional military aid and assistance. Make sure they have the javelins and the drones and the technological capability and the airplanes to be able to push back against the Russian Air Force. And it's my understanding that those dynamics are being worked out. We can't provide airplanes that have been made and are utilized by the Navy or the Air Force, because the Ukrainians aren't equipped to operate those planes. But they are equipped to operate MiGs, and some of our allies in Europe, Central and Eastern Europe, do have MiGs, and hopefully that will be able to be worked out.
What if banning Russian oil, though, doesn't work in stopping the war?
Well, I think there's incredible pressure being brought to bear by the world on Putin and Russia, and hopefully we'll see that he will come to his senses. But at the same time, it can't just be, as I'm suggesting, and I'll yield to Pete, economic sanctions and or humanitarian aid. That's important, but we also are in the midst of watching a hot war in Ukraine and have to make sure that the Ukrainian people have the ability to defend themselves with the most sophisticated weapons known to man.
Mr. Chairman, I think with gas prices where they are and the trajectory they're headed on, I think a lot of private sector businesses are wondering if they should keep some workers out of office to kind of soften demand, keep the roads a little emptier. I think the federal government should consider that, maybe keep the federal workforce, maybe even the congressional workforce remote if you can, while we're in a gas price crisis.
Well, I don't want to comment on any specific steps that the administration may be contemplating, but I think everything should be on the table in terms of an all hands on deck approach. It's not just an all of government moment. It's an all of America moment, and it's an all of the free world moment, because this is really a conflict between democracy and autocracy, and a very deadly, lethal, brutal enemy in Vladimir Putin. And to the extent that corporate America, American businesses, as was the case during World War II, see themselves as part of the effort to ease the sacrifices that may be required here, I think that would be a positive development for the country.
On another Russian oil ban question, obviously, if this happens, we're going to see gas prices likely increase. What is the thinking within your caucus about how to deal with that issue specifically? And what has been the reaction of your colleagues to things like diplomatic outreach to countries like Venezuela and Saudi Arabia in terms of like increasing the global oil supply?
Yeah, that issue hasn't come up, but I think increasing the global oil supply at the moment, to the extent that there are implications, particularly for Europe, which is more heavily reliant upon Russian oil than we are here in the United States of America, um, is an important discussion, particularly with traditional allies in the Gulf states, such as Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and others. I assume those conversations are taking place, but I haven't been read into them, and we await, further clarity from the administration.
Yeah. All I'll say is, we're concerned about lowering costs for everyday Americans. And we're also mindful that after our press conference here, some of our colleagues on the other side of the aisle are going to be up here talking about, unleashing the potential of this country, but they may not mention the 9,000 leases that we haven't acted on here domestically. So we understand that this could be taking supply, off of the table. But President Biden has led on this issue, approving leases more than his predecessor in the past. So that's not lost on us that this administration has and will continue to take decisive action to help supply and to help guide this country forward. We're mindful of that and mindful about the decisions that they have to make. But we're focused on our communities and making the best policy. And this is a proposal that is the best policy for the country.
Question on BBB. You talked about some of the cost-cutting measures in BBB. Is there any sign that this bottleneck in the Senate is coming unstuck? What gives you some hope that we're finally going to see Build Back Better move forward, or some parts of it?
Well, the focus right now is on making sure, as Vice Chair Aguilar indicated, we fund the government, that it doesn't shut down, that we reach an omnibus spending agreement sooner rather than later, hopefully in the next day or so. We were briefed on some of the progress being made in the discussions by Chairwoman Rosa DeLauro. And we also want to make sure that we provide aid and assistance to the Ukrainian people on an emergency basis. And of course, take further steps in terms of sanctioning Putin and Russia for their illegal war in Ukraine right now. So I think that's that's the emphasis, and should be over the next day or so. And then presumably we'll hear from the president about his further legislative vision for building a better America.
Last question?
Congressman,
Yeah, we can take these two.
Okay.
Yeah, go ahead, and then.
Is the China competitiveness bill, the America Competes Act, something that you would like to add to your slate? You guys would like to add to your slate of bills passed for the midterms in the coming weeks and months, or is that kind of taking a back seat right now to all this Ukraine legislation, Build Back Better?
Well, we're going to continue to work hard to make America the most competitive that it can be, for the sake of everyday Americans, to continue to create good paying jobs, to lower costs for everyday Americans, and to lean into those particular areas. And so the America Competes Act is an important part of that agenda. And it's something that I think we'll be able to get over the legislative finish line. As Pete indicated, you're going to hear our colleagues talking about unleashing the potential for America. Where were they when President Biden and Democrats in the House and the Senate were passing the American Rescue Plan to lay the foundation to help rescue and save the economy and create 7.4 million good paying jobs? Where were they when President Biden put in place a series of policies to create the fastest rate of economic growth in 40 years? Where were my Republican colleagues when it relates to the efforts that were underway, led by President Biden, to lower unemployment to pre-pandemic levels of 3.8%? They were missing in action. That's the answer. And so the notion that they want to now come here and lecture us when Vladimir Putin is the one responsible if gas prices increase significantly here in America. Vladimir Putin. And they shouldn't provide any aid and comfort to him, a brutal dictator. We know they have practiced doing so because Donald Trump did it for 4 years, which may explain some of the brazenness that we're seeing right now in Eastern Europe. Last question.
Companies like Visa and MasterCard have voluntarily cut off relationships with Russia more than that. How do you feel about that? Do you welcome companies taking these voluntary actions? And there's also been some concern that this can push Russia closer to China.
I think these companies are taking actions in the best interest of national security, as well as, being thoughtful and mindful about their relationships across the globe. I think that these are companies who are doing the right thing, and so many of them across so many Fortune 500 companies have made that decision, and I think that's helpful to our efforts to show in a strong, unified way with our allies across this globe that there are consequences to misbehavior. And there are consequences to the aggression that Russia is exercising, and a lot of these companies are stepping up. You mentioned some of them. There's a lot of companies from the chairman's state of New York and mine from California who are stepping up and leading the way here. We tip our hat to their efforts. We encourage more to lead in this regard as well. And I think that this is an important step surrounded by the actions that we can take here in government that will further send the message to Vladimir Putin that we will continue to isolate his economy as well as his country with their continued steps.
Yeah, and let me just simply add that, we embrace the efforts by all of these companies to try to do their part, because this is an all hands on deck effort. And it's important to point out that because of leadership from this administration, from the president, from the United States ambassador to the United Nations, China unexpectedly abstained before the UN Security Council and abstained in the vote condemning Russia's behavior before the General Assembly. I think China understands where the world is at as it relates to Russian aggression, and ultimately will not take any negative messages from any actions that the free world takes in pushing back against Vladimir Putin. Thank you, everyone.